No difference at all. Just a different sex.
The features I produced, I have actually worked with 2 women directors. And here's the big news flash, they're no different than men. I mean, it's, you know, women are as thorough, as competent, as talented as any of the men that I've worked with. And I think there's always a challenge when one starts to analyze gender. We can't help but do that now, though, given the unfortunate discrepancy in statistics that show women and minorities are nowhere near equally represented in the business in very key roles.
Every year, the faculty, we put together this list of 50 films that we think that the incoming students should see before they start their studies. And, you know, that list will be greatly influenced by, you know, the background, you know, the ethnic and racial background and gender background of the faculty who's putting that list together. People forget, you know, they start naming their favorite films, and if you don't have somebody in the room with a different perspective, or somebody in the room who just says, hey, you know, we just added 5 films to the list, none of them are women directors, none of these films come from, you know, Asia or Africa.
We can't change thousands of years of cultural stereotypes, of gender stereotypes overnight. And power is a particular thing. Being a director is a form of power that is often given to you. And people usually, you know, have a complicated relationship to power and who they give power to and who takes power.
Amanda, I told you to go to the infirmary and lie down. You never listen.
No, Josh, because I don't take orders. Not from you and not from any man.
Here's the whole thing that I think about sexism. A lot of it is unconscious. I think that a lot of people aren't even aware that they're holding a bias. And in some ways, maybe bias is better than using sexism. I teach in a film school. It's really clear there's not a lack of talent. I mean, it isn't about talent and not knowing how to run a set and not knowing how to deliver the goods quickly, creatively, on time and on budget. That's not the issue. So the only conclusion would be that there's some kind of institutional bias. I think there is a thing where people tend to feel more comfortable with other people who look like them. And it's subtle, and it's what people call the boys' club. If women were dominant, I'm sure they'd be calling it a women's club. But women aren't dominant right now.
In July of 2013, acclaimed American filmmaker Spike Lee made public his list of movies that all aspiring filmmakers must see. It was a list he normally gave to his film students at the Tisch School at NYU, one of the finest film programs in the nation, on their first day of class. The media backlash was immediate. Where were the women directors? Of the 87 movies on his list, only one was co-directed by a woman. A month later, Lee re-released his list with an addendum of 7 films. These were directed by 4 different women directors, only 2 of whom were American. Lee was commended for taking the criticism about his original list to heart. But the implications of a list of important films that virtually omitted women, dispersed by a well-respected filmmaker to legions of future filmmakers, had already sent a clear message. In the big leagues, women filmmakers were just an afterthought.
I'm in a position where I'm in an institution You know, we're training the next generation. We're feeding the industry. So we're actually in a position where we can have an effect. When we're making admissions decisions, that's the day that we're deciding what the future of the film industry looks like. What percentage of the women are finishing and getting the film degree and wanting to continue pursuing a career in film, and how many are just discouraged by the fact that they're sitting in a classroom and being told over and over again, you know, that all the great filmmakers are white men.
When you're like physically in class and you're talking about, you know, especially mainstream film, you're talking about film and spent an entire year in a film history class and you have not seen a film with a black director. All the films being shown are white male directors. So, you know, you're kind of already getting a message that it's going to be difficult.
What we're asking students to do is really just open up, you know, as an artist and be vulnerable. Now, when a student is doing that and their professor is giving them feedback and their professor is coming from a completely different point of view, culturally, racially, you know, it's very difficult. And it always makes me uncomfortable when I'm in a committee meeting or something. Let's say it's a thesis committee or a pre-thesis committee, and we're sitting around the table and there's a young black woman who's our student, and she's presenting her story, and on the other side of the table are 4 middle-aged white men. And we maybe don't get her story. We're not really relating to it. You know, we're critiquing it or criticizing it on a kind of unfair vantage.
Not like hell.
You know, the one thing I can't figure out is whether these girls are real smart or just real lucky.
Don't matter. Brains will only get you so far. Luck always runs out.
I do look at them and I think which of you will really have a career. I think there'll certainly be some of the women that I teach that have taught, who will go into other element, you know, become editors or writers.
Women that were the generation before mine were tough. I think that's the only way they knew how to get done what needed to be done. They slipped into that bitch persona. Or we saw it as bitch persona, and if they were men, maybe I wouldn't have perceived it that way. I don't know.
I'm no girl, I'm a woman. Do you hear me? I'm not your wife or your mother or even your mistress. What? I am your employee, and as such, I expect to be treated equally, with a little dignity and a little respect. What do you mean?
If a man is acting like that, then they're just being assertive and getting the job done, and they want a great film or a great piece. But if a woman acts assertive, then, you know, they're being a bitch.
When I am assertive, I'm a bitch. When a man is assertive, he's a boss.
Bossed up.
He bossed up.
Yeah, he bossed up.
No negative connotation behind bossed up.
I guess I don't know, like, certain directors or filmmakers, but the one thing that I always would like tell my mom is that, you know, there's no female Quentin Tarantino, there's no female Steven Spielberg. All these big name directors or producers are men. I don't know any women. I can't name, and that's really sad, but I can name all these male directors that I admire, but I can't name a woman, a female producer or director that I admire.
When people aren't aware that they have this hidden prejudice or bias, that, as you know, studies have shown that when a woman does the same thing and makes the decision that a man does, the man is applauded for his, you know, authority and making a tough decision, and the woman is seen as a bitch and nobody wants to go along with her. And that it's equally men and women that feel that same way. And that's the thing I think people forget. Like, we're always pointing the finger at, oh, those damn men, when you have to realize that women carry that same prejudice as well. So you're talking about have to dig really deep to begin to untangle that.
Watch your thoughts for they become words. Watch your words for they become actions. Watch your actions for they become habits. Watch your habits for they become your character. And watch your character for it becomes your destiny. What we think we become.
There are stereotypes which run very deep. Like, if you get into an airplane and you're listening to the pilot and it's a young woman, there's a party that's going to think, uh-oh. You want your pilot to be 50 and sound like he's from the Midwest in some way. So I think that a little bit of that is going on. You want your director to come in and look like what you think is a director, because these are millions of dollars at stake. And it's just a deep fear that every single time a woman breaks through and either makes a film that makes some money, gets some attention, every time that happens, we're a little bit further ahead.
I've never seen a female cinematographer be successful, be it walking around, have their names mentioned on the newspapers. I can't think of a female cinematographer from the top of my head, except for my professor.
And I grew up in Europe. If you walk around any city in Europe, especially like, France or Paris or whatnot, you see statues everywhere. And what do you see? You see famous old men and naked women, beautiful naked women. When you grow up and you see wise, craggy-faced men, you kind of grow up thinking, okay, it's okay to be wise and craggy-faced men, but you don't see wise, craggy-faced women. The images that we see of women, just the visual, iconic landscape, does not have that many images of positive, powerful women. The old crone, or you have the young, beautiful princess. But you don't have the celebrated, wise, strong, powerful woman.
Feminine weakness and fainting spells are the direct result of our confining young girls to the house, bent over their needlework in restrictive corsets.
But I think there is the fact that when a man has a fit on a set, they're often justifiably, displaying rage at the situation. If a woman loses it on a set, it's considered shrill and hysterical, and you must never, ever do that.
Look, my hands are tied here. The company needs a man in this position. Clients would rather deal with men when it comes to figures.
Oh, now we're getting at it. I lose a promotion because of some idiot prejudice. The boys in the club are threatened, and you're so intimidated by any woman that won't sit at the back of the bus.
Spare me the women's lib crap, okay? Now, I know how you feel, and I understand it.
You understand zilch.
And at this production company in the mid-'70s, late '70s, was really the beginning, the height of the women's movement. Was a group of what I really admired, my first strong women in production. But not one of them was a producer. All of them were production coordinators or production assistants. And any time the company needed a producer, they would go outside the company and hire a man. And I guess it was one fall, the company put together a company meeting where we all went off together to discuss the company and the future of the company, and there was an absolute mutiny. These group of women, they said, we're not putting up with this anymore. We've each put in 5, 6, 7 years in this company, and we know more about production than any man that they're bringing in, and we demand to be producers or we're all quitting. President of the company scratched his head and he was like, but you girls are just so great where you are. And they're like, sorry, you need producers and we're the next producers. People you hire are going to be production assistants. And that was like the shift in that company where then women became producers, which I thought was very interesting.
I was once told by a great, very successful director that when I was trying to get the money for The Private Lives of Pippa Lee, that if I would have a male protagonist, I would have a 70% higher chance of getting my film made. And I thought, well, that's rather disturbing news. I have to say, recently I've been pretty amazed at how many movies that are otherwise good movies have so few women in them, and that the female parts are really, really so awful and so tiny and so one-dimensional. You can get away with that a lot.
A lot of times it feels like in the pitching process, it's really hard to get people excited about female-centric stories. If it's even remotely related to something that came before, people will say, well, that's been done before, kind of like I remember when my film was out there people were saying, well, the Big Greek Wedding was out there, and I was like, well, it's not that much like the Big Fat Greek Wedding. It does center on a woman and her cultural identity, so I see the similarity, but a lot of it is very different, and there can be a million films just like The Hangover, for example, and nobody blinks twice.
Why couldn't it be recognized that I was the only female voice in the creation process and that Michelle got the Oscar nomination for her role, and that they're somehow related?
It doesn't ever disappoint you?
Why? Why would it disappoint me? I could
you have
still
all
do
this
whatever
potential?
I could do. So what? Why do you have to fucking make money off your potential?
Look, I'm not even saying you have to make
What does
money off it if
potential
you
mean?
miss it.
What does even potential mean?
I came to Sundance for 2 days. I wasn't given a place to stay. I had my 2-month-old daughter with me, and the whole cast and crew of Blue Valentine were going out to dinner, but I was told that they didn't have enough room for me. I don't know if it was a woman thing. I don't know if it was the fact that I had my daughter with me. I don't know if it was a writer thing. I don't know if it was I'm just an annoying person thing. It could have been all of those things. There could have been none of them. Also, the director forgot to introduce me at the premiere. It was like a super packed house, and I asked the director beforehand, I was like, hey, just make sure you introduce me. I asked him beforehand, and then the screening happened, and Ryan and Michelle came up on stage, the producers came up on stage, the editors came up on stage, the production designer came up on stage, the costume designer came up, the still photographer came up on stage. Like all of these people, there were like 20 people up on stage, and then the director said, am I forgetting anybody? And I was with my manager at the time, and he's like, Cami Delevingne, the writer? And he's like, oh yeah, Cami Delevingne, I totally forgot. And I was like, oh my God, this is not what I expected. Like, especially because like my manager before the screening had said, he said to me, okay, he's like, after the screening, people are gonna flock to you. They're gonna flood, just direct them to me, they're gonna wanna sign you. They're gonna wanna, whatever, all of this stuff. None of that happened. Absolutely none of that. And it wasn't, even if Derek had introduced me, I'm not saying like I would have been like flooded by every like agent in town, but that set in motion this like humility that I had, and this humiliation.
But I'm all right. At the end of the day, we can endure much more than we think we can.
There's a phenomenon in the industry when we look at the numbers is that we know there's not enough women directors making movies and getting their stories out there. There are a lot of women producers. You know, this seems to be an area that it's not totally balanced, but the percentage of women producers is far greater than directors. You know, men or women can do either job. It just tends, you know, the flow right now is that men get to be the vision leaders and women get to be the person who facilitates the man's vision.
I can see in every avenue I've worked with that there is an ease and comfort and assumption that men are going to run stuff better when it comes to standing in the director's seat. You know, and everyone quotes the same ones over and over. You know, there's Catherine Bigelow, there was Mimi Leder a million years ago, but there haven't really been other people that have gotten a chance to do really big budget films. I see those opportunities given to men over and over when there are women with comparable experience and abilities, and it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle.
I think that female stereotypes are still a very big thing in my class, like the whole sophomore year. More females are into editing. And my professor likened it to sewing. Like, editing is like sewing because you're piecing things together. And he explained that's why women are more into editing, because it's a very intricate and precise procedure to edit it and to sew.
Love conquers all. Every cloud has a silver lining. Faith can move mountains. Love will always find a way. Everything happens for a reason. Where there's life, there's hope. Oh, well. They gotta tell you something.
I think that there's a cultural shift beginning to occur, but I still don't think there's going to be some radical shift in the next decade, or God forbid, even two, unfortunately. I had thought when I came of age, like I started in the business in the late 70s, early 80s. I certainly came out of a period of time that was identified with feminism and a real shift in consciousness. So I would never have thought to be 30-some years later still having to talk about it and seeing that it continues to persist on the level it does now. It's a little disappointing, but it is what it is.
It might be surprising to learn that at the dawn of the film industry, women were far more prominent behind the scenes than they are now. According to the Writers Guild of America, from the official start of the film industry in 1895 to the mid-1920s, women outnumbered men in the screenwriting trade 10-1. At the time, many were doubtful that moving pictures were any more than a passing trend. Respected and lucrative entertainment writing at the time came in the form of playwriting, which was dominated by men. At the turn of the century, many studios were run by women too. The first to head a studio in the US was French-born Alice Guy Blanche. She was followed by many other female studio heads, including Lowell Warrington, Florence Lawrence, Dorothy Davenport, and Lois Weber. But even though there were a lot of women making movies, they were still treated like second-class citizens. In one of her final interviews, filmmaker Frances Marion recalls the peak of her career in the 1910s and 20s, when she and her fellow female writers regularly worked without any credit. It would take 40 years for women to make their presence known in Hollywood again.
I teach at NYU, and I actually had a student, I think it was last year, who he did he outlined some scene. It was in a bar, and there were 3 women who didn't want to be picked up on by our nerdy guy. And so for the rest of the script, they were referred to as the bitches. And nobody had a problem with it. They were like, everybody was reading, they like heard the bitches and ha ha ha, they were laughing. I was like, okay, like, I'm gonna pull it out. Like, I'm sorry, you can't get away with that.
It's the Bechdel test. The movie. This movie will pass the test.
Hey Jesse, whatever happened to that teaching job that you applied for?
Oh, I didn't tell you? I got it.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you for asking, Stacy. Oh, and Debbie, I saw that you went on a trip to France.
I did. It was really fun, and I loved the wine they have there.
That's it. That's the whole test. And now that we passed, we can cut the bullshit and do what we do best. Tying up women.
Or I'm gonna tear that pretty little girl's face off.
That's more like it.
Oh, come on.
Now this is a movie that people want to see.
Hey, how much for a blowjob, huh?
It's not disgusting because we gave you that scene where the ladies talked about lady things.
I mean, it's gonna be okay.
You don't understand me. No one does.
You also get into a thing that goes very, very deep, like DNA deep, about when women start to boss men around. That, on some deep psychological level, can create issues unless men are really highly involved and get that it's not a threat.
What'd you do? Wake up this morning and say, today, I'm gonna ruin a man's life.
When I was younger, men took over. Men did take over, and I sometimes have that problem on set, where I'll go into direct, and the cameraman will come out from behind the camera and start directing, or answer my questions for me, and that still happens. That still happens. And I'll pull them aside sometimes I won't say something. I said, would you do that if I was a man? And they stop and think, and they go, probably not. But I do notice that a lot of men still do that. They'll answer my questions, they'll talk for me, they'll start directing on top of me, and that's difficult.
Perhaps there's a mistrust in the industry of the stories that many women want to tell. You know, a sort of old wives' tale that continues to kick around is that, you know, I think certainly genres like horror, action, thrillers, and in fact, the more epic dramas, you see more men working there. And you see women working with smaller budgets, generally speaking. It's certainly not something that I want to say is true across the board.
I don't necessarily think there's that big a difference between the way women write and the way men write. But I think where you do notice it is with men. Because I do think sometimes, you know, men will write what they think a woman would say in like a highly charged, you know, situation. And of course you're sitting there like, no woman would say that.
And one of the other stories I want to say is we had at this production company client reviews, which were all of our clients, and these were corporate clients, were all men, always all men. And when we had client reviews, our boss would say, well, what are you going to wear? Do you have something kind of cute? How about that low-cut something or other you could wear? And I did the cute sexy when I presented my work, because you would have to present your work in front of like a row of suits, and you would perform, and definitely did the cute sexy.
Me. Look, I've been straight with you from the first day I got here, and I put up with all your pinching and staring and chasing me around the desk because I need this job, but this is the last straw.
All right, now wait, let's just sit down and...
Look, I got a gun out there in my purse, and up to now I've been forgiving and forgetting because of the way I was brought up, but I'll tell you one thing. If you ever say another word about me or make another indecent proposal, I'm going to get that gun of mine, and I'm going to change you from a rooster to a hen with one shot. Don't think I can't do it.
So we have to, as a woman, hit this like really crazy role of like denying who we are as a woman because we have to be a man, but yet we have to be superwoman because we have to be like size 2. We just love to have sex and we love to talk about sports and we're really smart. Like all of these things that are so, it's just too much for one woman to be.
I say that women should, be the person they want to be, and they shouldn't, fit into these roles of being the cutesy girl or whatever. But then I play that role because I feel like if I don't, then I won't get to where I need to go. Because, I'm a business major, so I know how business works. I know that it's not always fair. I know that, it's not always logical, but you have to do what you have to do.
You don't know how hard it is being a woman looking the way I do.
Yeah, well, you don't know how hard it is being a man looking at a woman looking the way you do.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
It's a friend of a friend. It's a woman writer writing in television. She was up for a job. It was between her and another writer, a man. And they decided to go with the man because the showrunner said, quote unquote, his wife wasn't comfortable with him having a woman in the writer's room because they were going to be working late nights, very close together, and his wife had a problem with it. Like a man could be in a writer's room with a gay man because they like know that they're not going to want to have sex. The hetero guy is not going to want to have sex with the gay guy, but put a woman in the room and like it's not only he's not trusting himself, but his wife's also not trusting him. And so that just like has another woman who's not able to enter into that sphere, which is the sphere of that collaborative work. That woman in that collaborative area is somehow suspect because she's going to be tempting everybody with her vagina. Holy shit. But yet a man or a gay man doesn't have that same sort of thing. So it's like, it's really aggravating. How do you solve that problem? You can't go in and just be the cool guy that people want to have a beer with. That gets presidents elected, that gets men jobs, that gets like CEOs, into their positions of power. But women, we have this, you want to sleep with her or you want to have a beer with him. And so if you're going into a situation where you're not going to be sleeping with everybody in the room, we don't have anything else to fall back on. So we want to be the girl who you want to have a beer with, and then that becomes this sort of like fantasy woman that we see now, which is that like she loves sports, she's super hot, she's your best friend, she loves to drink beer. We love to embrace the man-child like stereotype. We don't have that love for that flawed female, who is every female.
Just as you are. Not thinner, not cleverer, not with slightly bigger breasts and slightly smaller nose.
Yes.
What?
I love you so much, but I will never be one of those women, Dennis, who stays silent and pretty on the arm of her husband, or remote and alone in the kitchen, doing the washing up for that matter.
We'll get help for that.
No. One's life must matter, Dennis. Beyond all the cooking and the cleaning and the children, one's life must mean more than that. I cannot die washing up a teacup. I mean it, Dennis. Say you understand.
That's why I want to marry you, my dear.
And it's just a question, really, of keeping that track record moving forward. Who's your husband? Who's your partner or your partner? What's your setup? Can you leave your family? Do you feel okay about leaving your family? And I think that has a lot to do with the whole thing, because women's biological clocks are such that they're having children kind of in the moment they need to be building their careers. That doesn't mean that women can't, they do, but it makes things a little bit more difficult. And again, that can change as attitudes change, as their partners' attitudes change, as women's themselves accept the fact that perhaps as a director, I'm going to be somebody that's away for a certain number of months, and that I have a partner who's okay with being at home for that number of months, just like a male director does. But a lot of women don't accept that for themselves. It's not even that they're being forced from outside. It's that there's an internal conflict. So I think all these different things are conspiring to kind of slow the progress.
See, that's the funny thing. I can't have a baby because I have a 12:30 lunch meeting.
I do believe, I could be wrong, but I believe, the data out there is women still are the primary caregivers, especially in early childhood. So again, if you were to just look at the numbers, there's the fact that during some sort of critical productive years, women are probably going to be, like I was, home in sweatpants for a few years, cleaning rice cereal off the floor, or whatever we're doing, either by necessity or by choice, and that it's often hard to get back in after that. That's certainly not true for all filmmakers, all young women filmmakers busting out there. I would say that we do it. We have children and we make films, and that's maybe really the important takeaway. It's really hard.
It's a truth universally acknowledged that the moment one area of your life starts going okay, another part of it falls spectacularly to pieces.
In my classes, it's interesting because there's no difference in the quality of work. Again, there are some students who do amazing work regardless of gender, and I've had female students and male students win all these awards, and I'm super proud of them. Some of the girls I have to train them to be a little bit more assertive without being abrasive, and it's just a very delicate line. But the guys too, and they have to learn that too. Some of them I say, you know what, you sounded arrogant, and that doesn't really play well these days in advertising. As a teacher, I look at the women and the men, and talent-wise, I don't see any real difference. I do think that sometimes you'll have a situation where the women are less assertive, less entitled, more hesitant to impose their will. They tend to be cowed by actors more easily. Now, this is not true of all of them, but even young women, these are women in their early 20s who have come up, and they might actually be more talented in the sense of having greater capacity for empathy, and ultimately can get to a point where they're actually more effective in directing scenes. But initially, they have to get over certain personal roadblocks in terms of how they've been raised to be polite, to be acquiescent, or if not acquiescent, manipulative in such a way that they seem nice.
I'm smart, I'm hardworking, and I'll do anything, and I'm not leaving here without a job.
I think some of the barriers that I experienced, some of them were from the outside world. Just like looking at me, I'm not a big person. I was a very young-looking girl, and I didn't walk in the room and people go, "Oh, that's a director." I didn't have that, archetypical director image when I would walk in the room. So yes, maybe I didn't have all the opportunities because of that. Maybe a lot of that did precede me.
For women, part of what they learn in the program, I think, is to begin to how to command on a set. When they start in the first year, they consistently tell me that their brethren are often trying to call cut instead of the director when they're in other positions, that they aren't listening as much, that they have to fight that much harder to get their point of view across. So that within the cocoon of school, you're being given a great opportunity to begin to practice how to deal with that. By being able to address it straight on and not try to pretend it doesn't exist. I hope that we're beginning to help them, our female students, start to get a better grasp of how they're going to have to present themselves without feeling like they're putting on a false front and putting on behavior or armor that doesn't suit them. You want men and women working together early on in their careers because that's the thing that will begin to change what the workplace looks like and what the film business looks like.
I'm just a girl in the world. That's all that you'll let me be.
My husband went to study film at RISD back in the 90s, mid-90s kind of time, and he would always talk about how women would drop out of the film department because of the screaming, like the young 19, 20-year-old guys are just like yelling at each other. They're like, it's this point of like pride to like make that film and like no, and I see him with his best friend who lives in LA. When they get together and they're screaming at each other. For me, that's not a way that I can work. Somebody screams at me and I cry, and so, but that sort of very physical, testosterone fueled, aggressive attitude is definitely a part of filmmaking, because you have to have really thick skin and really sharp elbows to keep going with a vision.
You fool. No man can kill me. Die now.
I am no man. The way women tend to want to operate things is with a gentler approach. Very often they're trying to reach consensus. Some reason consensus building or soliciting feedback is seen as weak. There are many corporations that have, in the last 10 years, realized that's a more effective and productive way and style of leadership. As a producer, if you own the project and you can find the money to get it made, who's gonna stop you? I think that there are still issues with a lot of things about how you get breaks, how you get access to information, and it still is a male-dominated industry. I mean, when I first started in the business, there weren't that many women doing this stuff. There weren't that many women crewing. I know that people, when we did my first films back in the 80s, a lot of the actors on the set, many of whom were male, kept saying it was one of the first sets where they really had women around. And they really appreciated that because it stopped it from being such a locker room kind of place.
And my experience with men is that there is kind of a testing period where there's like a jockeying, they test you, they tease you. There's like this thing where you have to kind of earn the respect and the power, but once you have it, the hierarchy is put in place and they're kind of all at ease.
I've noticed that, on set, I'm much more anxious about sort of, missing a moment to go deal with my family than some men are, because I don't want to be perceived as distracted by my family. That's my problem. I need to have the guts to say, hey, I'm working and I have a family, and it's okay. Just like he's working and he has a family, and that's okay.
Men have been fortunate in that they can have it all, and women have to make a lot of sacrifices. And I didn't become a mom until I was much older, and I don't think I would have had the career I had if, I had done it a different way. But when my son was born, I worked much less. I took fewer jobs, much less prestigious jobs. I didn't travel as much. I made a lot of sacrifices.
Men are competitive, but they're more prone to help each other than women are. And I feel like it's like we already have to deal with men putting us down, but now we're putting each other down. So it's kind of like it gets even worse. Like I said, I think it goes back to women not really being encouraged to, be assertive and be a businesswoman and, market themselves and brand themselves and want to create their own venture. But men are that's more like hardwired into them.
You must always have faith in people. And most importantly, You must always have faith in yourself.
I do feel like women have the tendency to build these friendships and relationships throughout the creative process and add an emotional component to it, where men don't always do that. And sometimes I can see the value in not doing that. I think it's very individual, so I don't want to overly make a blanket statement, but I tend to think that women sort of lead by like really trying to inspire and form these relationships and like really get people excited about what they're doing, whereas I think men a lot of times will just take that role of director and that's enough. As women, we're taught to sometimes be more apologetic, so I sometimes think we can even bring it on when we're like, I think it might work better if you, as opposed to, why don't you try, a more confident way to speak. And so I feel like, not to be victim blaming, but I feel like when I've had more confidence, I've been questioned less.
And what I've learned is there are no two directors who are alike, male or female. Every director has his or her own style. Not that I've seen, I mean, I know there are all these cliches, but in my what I've personally witnessed, no, they're all unique.
Every college kids, especially males, they have to incorporate some taboo in their films. Every college film has a gun. Every college film has weed. Every college film has cigarettes. With my female friends, it's more about the characters and the relationship between the characters. I think females can write males. Maybe this is from a biased side, but males can write female.
Women and men's stories are not always the same. In fact, I find them very, very different. And there's kind of a classical training in film, in cinema, that starts with Aristotle, and Aristotle was a guy. And Aristotle said all drama comes from conflict. And I think if Aristotle was a woman, we might have a different definition of drama. The way we've been trained, you look at like the classical 3-act structure and, the basic story of a man goes out to slay the dragon, has to cross the bridge. All these things, these are very masculine stories. They're very assertive. We're taught that a protagonist is active, that is actively pursuing something, and that's what makes a good story. My female students will often be criticized because their characters are passive. Their characters are coping with problems. And, it was after listening to that in the critiques, around school and watching female students time and time again create characters like that, I started to realize, but that's a different story. It's not wrong. It's a different story.
I'm not driving off into the sunset. I'm just seeing what happens next.
When women are in a position of leadership, very often the way they lead looks different than the way men lead. Other women gave me a shot, and I've given other women a shot. And that's part of what we've got to do. But also men gave me a shot. And I've given men shots as well. One of the great pleasures of a producer is actually being able to spot talent early on. And because I made so many low-budget films, part of what it is you're forced to do that. You can't buy experience, so you have to be able to spot it early on about who you think has the real potential to do it. And they'll work 10 times as hard to make it happen because it's a win-win situation. You're giving them a break. They want it they want to do a really good job.
I think men are learning that they have to be multicultural and maybe not even consciously. I can tell you that in my class, one of the best classes ever that I had at NYU was the most diverse class I ever had. There was a Muslim woman who was wearing a headscarf and, these more like macho dudes and everything. And that diversity is healthy. And people say it's good for business. And when you can actually monetize it and actually prove that it's good for business, I believe fundamentally that diversity is beyond an issue of fairness. It's an issue about evolution, and it makes us all better.
The people controlling the money have to want diversity. And if they don't want it, you're not shaming them into doing it. They're going to hire the people that they hire. I feel like personally, I can't talk about diversity and then I don't do it in my classes. Like, it just would feel wrong for me to do that. You know, and of course I show things that I like. And yeah, probably the majority of things that I like are directed by white males, you know, and because, you know, they won the race, right? But that doesn't mean if I don't look a little harder, if I don't do a little more research, if I don't, you know, discuss with my peers and my colleagues and my friends and even my kids, you know, what's out there, you know, if I just do a little more homework, I can have a diverse screening list. Having a diversity of storytelling, having a diversity of point of view, having a diversity of is everything of you know, income that's reflected on TV. Like, all of that matters because the United States is such a diverse country, and we're still looking at TV that didn't move that far away from the 1950s. And I know some people, maybe they grew up, they never, you know, saw women in power positions. They never saw black people doing any other thing besides cleaning. And I know there's people like that. I'm friends with people like that. I think the more that we are exposed to and have to interact with people who are different from us makes us smarter. They already proved it. It makes us better, it makes us smarter, it makes us more empathetic. It makes us take the time to mediate a conflict rather than, you know, taking up arms.
One of the things you see over and over is when someone gets their first feature made, it's really hard to get the second one made. True, again, for both men and women. But the statistics will show yet again that the rate of fall off for women directors is much higher than men. And I just don't believe that women want to make movies that no one wants to see. I just don't buy that.
It starts with people making it a priority. It is also, by making it a priority, we are, as a group of living, breathing things, essentially eating our vegetables. We are doing something that isn't the easiest thing to do, but it's something that we should do. And it's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen if we keep talking about it. In just like a very small way. That's what I do in my classes, is like, if I meet one-on-one with a woman, I'm always saying, you got to work 10 times harder. Nobody's going to take your hand. Nobody's going to like lead you. If you're lucky, you'll get a mentor.
Yeah. And what do you think I'm paying you for? So they shouldn't like it?
I didn't know you were paying me. And I don't know what you're paying me, but I'll bet it isn't enough.
I recently had spent some time with women in finance. They have a similar problem. High finance, there aren't as many women represented. Why? One of the reasons is that the guy upstairs isn't helping the person who doesn't seem like him. He's helping the person who seems like him, who reminds him of himself. For women, unfortunately, what happens sometimes is that you work, get to where you are, and then you think about the next woman coming up, well, let her work as hard as I worked. There isn't as much, I don't think, helping, and that's what they're reporting to me in finance, that the women who do make it, they're like, okay, pull up the ladder, I'm gonna just try and make it myself, and like there's a sense that I suffered so much, I don't want to make that person's life easier. And I think we have to get rid of that idea. I think that's going to be part of the problem.
I started an experiment in my classroom where I told them I was going to start using the word she, and said I think it's really important that we think about women as directors, and you know, I'm going to use that pronoun. Well, the rest of the class got devoted to this giant debate about why would that be necessary. And not surprisingly, it was several men who were decrying the need, necessity, or reasons for wanting to change a pronoun. And it was one of the other students who quietly spoke up, was actually a person of color, and said, this, actually, I think it does make a difference. The film business has made some progress in starting to get gender-neutral terms to describe crew positions. Like, for example, it always used to be cameraman. Now you just say camera or camera person. There's always sound man. Now you just say sound. You go through it over and over and over. And there's been heightened sensitivity to that stuff. which is a little bit of progress. Why aren't women hired? And I go, well, because women and men aren't hiring them. It doesn't help to give someone a break just based on race or gender or ethnicity. The person has to be ready and right for it. So all things being equal, I would always try to bring a woman up because I know how difficult it is and how important those first breaks are.
When the money starts coming from women, then I think we're going to start seeing a stronger change.
I think that the great gift of being a producer is you get to hire everybody. And of course, that can have tremendous impact on what that set looks like and what the job opportunities are. And as I said before, I do feel strongly about that. I do try to bring women along because they're so unequally represented. The good news is there are a lot of women in very, very powerful positions, especially in television, that are doing much more to bring along women directors. People tell me all the time that, you know, networks are trying to have quotas and make sure they keep going, we need women, we want to hire women. But even with all that stated intention, I would still go, well then why aren't you? And why aren't so many women on the list deemed not good enough to do it?
The most dangerous assumption is there's nothing that you can do, especially around gender. You know, oh, that's just how women are. That's just how men are. It's like, no, that's how some of us are. Sometimes, and it changes. So hard research seems incredibly important to me. There's also a number of women producers working now, many more than 20 years ago. All those women producers are incredibly important to the women directors. They're women who are in power, they make decisions, they probably have a few less assumptions about women, what women can and can't do. They can make decisions about who gets the money and who gets what job.
A lot of things are changing in really exciting ways with the different ways that people are viewing movies and television. For example, like when people watch things on the computer, it's usually because somebody recommended it as opposed to they saw a billboard, they saw a commercial. You know, so I feel like there's also like this new media that hopefully can turn into a little more of a meritocracy.
Girls are so pretty. You should smile.
At least a popularity contest, which I guess is better than, I mean, granted that meritocracy makes cute kitten videos get millions of hits, so I don't know. The change in how we look at media, I hope can be a little more of an equalizer.
Audiences' wants and enjoyments are being redefined in television. It's just incredibly important for this idea of women in film. Because I think if we say women in film, we should kind of be thinking women in film and television, women and the screen. That piece does change everything very, very powerfully, and perhaps even more powerfully than what's happened in independent film.
I think the difference between creating for mainstream content and, say, creating for the web or creating for YouTube is that part of it is necessity. Part of it is that the technology is just available. Because Hollywood, like I don't care if it's TV or movies, there's a finite amount of anything that's gonna get made. And with the web, there isn't. It isn't finite. You can create the stories you wanna be in if you're an actor. You can write, you know, the shows, direct the shows that, you know, stories that you're excited about. And then you have a place to show them, which is, you know, YouTube, or if you want to go to any of the other networks online. And there's an audience for it. And most likely it's an audience that's been neglected by the mainstream, been marginalized by the mainstream, been ridiculed and stereotyped to just gross exaggeration by the mainstream. And now those that audience and those voices have a show to go to. You know, the stuff that gets people excited, that they're talking about all over the web and Facebook and Tube Filter, are the stuff, the things that have a diversity of expression, of voice, of gender, you know, orientation, race, religion, I mean, the whole thing.
The thing is, if you're at the top and you have $100 million at stake, you're going to want to go with somebody who has a good track record. Now there's just a bigger pool of men to choose from. So as women start to be able to build their track record and make their movie for $100,000 that goes to Sundance, and then they're able to do the television show. Or, you know, I don't know, the trajectory of a great filmmaker is like, yeah, you make your Sundance feature, and then you make your next one that costs $5 million. So it's just a matter of time, and it's women having that sort of brand name that's what the studio heads are going to look at.
The model is changing, and as the model breaks apart and the monolithic structures, these enormous sort of feature film companies are perhaps less powerful, and then you get into television and you get into web series, etc., women will find that actually it's easier for them to come through.
I'm seeing some really amazing things going on nowadays. First of all, I love that the conversation's happening. These words that are exchanging, that are happening now, are part of the change. It's great. And it's not an isolated incident. You know, there are these books coming out. There are statistics coming out. People are talking about it. All the studios now, like I'm involved with the Directors Guild. And the Directors Guild, in our latest contract, stipulated that the studios have to have programs to promote diversity. I'm astonished to see, just in these past few years, the difference. There's been a huge movement of people wanting to employ women. There's still a gap between the intention and it actually happening. Everybody wants to hire more women, but people are still uncomfortable hiring somebody who doesn't have as many credits as somebody else. That's natural. So there is still a lot of resistance, but there's a huge amount of will.
More than ever, women filmmakers, or the lack thereof, have been making headlines in the last decade. One of the most thought-provoking pieces is the 2012 New York Times Room for Debate article that questions, how can women gain influence in Hollywood? At film festivals around the world, an anonymous group of women filmmakers, the Guerrilla Girls, have been creating a series of billboards, stickers, and posters that brazenly display the dismal statistics for women working as directors in the commercial film industry. Upon receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2012 in the Czech Republic, Dame Helen Mirren, one of the most decorated actresses of our time, urged more women to make movies. She also joined UK culture magazine Dazed and Confused initiative for film stars to select and fund their favorite women filmmakers to make narrative shorts or music videos. At least 2 companies exclusively dedicated to supporting women filmmakers exist now. Tangerine Entertainment and Game Changer Films both seek to fund and promote movies created by women, and they're sure not to be the last.
And I think that's one of the most important things, is not to wait to be invited. You've got to invite yourself. But it's hard to invite yourself when it costs millions and millions of dollars. When I graduated from film school, you could not make a cheap little movie. Now, I think it would have been very different for me if I was graduating now.
Everybody deserves to be heard. And so I think anytime you're able to express your voice, and any time that you can practice your craft is a good thing. I think it's good for women. I think it's good for people of color. I think it's good for people, you know, in the gay and lesbian community. I think it's a good thing, because when you look at what's coming out of mainstream, it has not been kind. And it's getting better, but too slow.
The separate quarters, the deferential treatment, it's the way you practically pulled my chair out from me when we first met.
Because I was civil? Now you're complaining.
I can't afford civility, sir. How am I supposed to fit in with these guys when you've got me set up as an outsider? You've given me a different set of rules.
One more generation and the world will step into a different age. And there will be no resistance.
People who hire are crazy not to hire women and people of color. They'll work harder. I want to see a society where there's equal representation and diversity. I think it's really boring if you don't have that.
One standard.
Just treat me the same, no better, no worse.
You're gonna get everything you want, O'Neill. Let's just see if you want what you're gonna get.
Hoo-yah, sir.